Yeah, we're on, off and running. Good evening, everybody. And although we're well into January, New Year to all those I haven't seen since Christmas, or New Year even. And welcome to the first meeting of this local plan committee. I must say that I think we will find it productive. I think it's fair to say that everyone in this room will get the same information as I do, as Cabinet Member for Planning, right? And let's crack on. First of all, evacuation procedure. I don't think there's anyone here at all that doesn't know their way out. So that will be fair enough. Any apologies for this evening?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Grant, substitute Councillor Brown, and apologies from Councillor Walmsley, substitute Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest at all as part of the report tonight? No? Okay, moving on. Agenda item number 4, an update on the local plan and a timetable for future work and review. And this is a report from the Head of Planning, page 7, and basically the recommendation is to note the report and agree that further reports be brought on a very contentious and probably going to be a difficult issue, but something that needs addressing on the Gypsy and Traveller Development Plan, and on the evidence base required to support the plan review to future meetings of this committee. Now, I'll hand over to Catherine at this point to take us through the purpose of the report.
Thank you. Right, as you can see, the report is an update on what's happened since the adoption of the local plan last June, to outline the work that we're undertaking at the moment, and also the work we're going to be doing in the next few months, and also that the likely reports be brought before this committee later for consideration. I'm sure most of you are aware that the local plan commits the council to produce further policy documents within it. Just by way of a bit of background, there are 2 types of planning policy document. There's a development plan document and a supplementary planning document, and they are different. So a development plan document is prepared by a local authority, it's subject to public consultation, and then it's submitted to the Secretary of State for independent examination. The local plan itself is a development plan document. A supplementary planning document, or SPD for short, is prepared by the local authority. Does what it says on the tin. It's to supplement the policies that were included in an adopted plan. It's also subject to public consultation, but is adopted by the council, so it doesn't go off for independent scrutiny. The local plan regulations, which are the regulations that we have to prepare local plans by, state that the timetable for the preparation of both development plan documents and supplementary planning documents should be included within an approved and publicised local development scheme. And the last one of these that we did was reported to and agreed by Cabinet last September, and I've attached that as Appendix A to the document. So the first group of SPDs were approved for public consultation in October last year, and that public consultation took place up until the 8th of December. And there's a list of all those in paragraph 4.1 of the report. The responses to those consultations are still being considered, and a further report on the SPDs will be put before Cabinet in the near future before being considered by full council for adoption. The second group of SPDs are set out in 4.3, will then be drawn up, again to be reported for public consultation sometime around June. There are also 2 further development plan documents to be prepared. There's the Town Centres Area Action Plan. The first stage of that is an issues and option document, and that's to link to the vision documents for Nuneaton and Bedworth town centres. And the other one that Councillor Phillips has already mentioned is a Gypsy and Travellers development plan document. Have a look at 4.5. The evidence base of the local plan states that 39 residential pitches and 5 transit pitches are required for gypsy and travellers, and the development plan document is actually to allocate or look to allocate sites to meet that need. We've done a call for sites on more than one occasion during the preparation and publication of this the local plan, and normal practice is for those sites to be included in a local plan. In fact, one of the versions did include some sites because none had been put forward, but that did raise a large number of objection, and it was decided at the time not to put those into the publication or version of the plan. But it was always agreed that a development plan document was still required to meet this need. The inspector could have made us included it in the local plan, but he did agree that we could treat it in the way that we're doing in a development plan document, but he was clear that we had to get on and do that. Since the plan has been adopted, a further call for sites has not yielded enough land to meet the need that's set out in the policy. So officers consider that the best way forward for this is for you to consider a further report on this specific topic sometime in the future. And that will be looking to see what else we can do to meet the need, looking at the sites that we've got and coming to some conclusion on what we would want to include in a development plan document to go out for public consultation. As you're aware, the approved local development scheme also sets out a timetable for the review of the local plan. Paragraph 3.9 of the report onwards sets out what the guidance and legislation states about local plan production, the evidence base, and then the duty to cooperate. I've summarised in 3.4 the situation with the other districts in Warwickshire's local plans, so that you're aware what the timescale where they are. Paragraph 4.8 sets out how the Warwickshire districts have worked together up to now to both reduce the costs associated with the preparation of a large amount of evidence required to do a local plan, and also to satisfy the duty to cooperate. And that's one of the first tests that any inspector will consider when a plan is under consideration, whether or not you've met the duty to cooperate. As you may be aware, during the preparation of the last plan, the policy team had very little resources, and the majority of evidence base was commissioned from outside consultants. We have now been able to fill all of the posts, and more of the work can be undertaken in-house. However, at the moment, all of the team are involved in the development of the next group of supplementary planning documents and the development plan document I've already mentioned. What the report is suggesting is that a further detailed report of what evidence base is likely to be required for such a review of the local plan, what could be considered to be carried out in-house, what should be looked at jointly with the other districts. That piece of work could be done by the next meeting of this committee for you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Councillor.
Thank you very much. Back in June, we adopted this plan. That was a long time ago. It was summertime. And we said we'd have an urgent review of the plan, because obviously the plan was based upon 2012 original stuff. So the plan was already 7 years out of date when it was adopted in terms of the fundamental research into housing numbers. We have last year built 641 homes in the borough, nowhere near the trajectory we're supposed to build according to the crazy calculations done and the pushing 4,000 homes from Coventry into Nuneaton. Of those, a remarkable imbalance exists between Nuneaton and Bedworth. We actually built 12 houses in Bedworth and 625 in Nuneaton. Clearly, things will change now we've got an adopted plan, and we'll have some more built in Bedworth. But I believe that will actually mean we'll have less built in Nuneaton, because fundamentally there is not a massive market in Nuneaton that will support building 1,000, 1,200 homes a year in the borough at the moment. We cannot do the 15,000 by 2031. We only have 11 years of a 20-year plan left, and we urgently need to change these numbers. because they're just mad. And having these numbers will mean developers will put in applications across all the countryside areas they love, and we will end up with a total mess. We'll end up spending a fortune on planning appeals, and we'll have an onion ring borough with death in the middle and then countryside built on. Very unsustainable. And we have a remarkable success actually building houses in the West Midlands Combined Authority. There was almost 17,000 built last year. A lot of it is in Birmingham, where there's student accommodation, in Coventry, and so we urgently need to get this review going, because it's not that houses aren't being built in the West Midlands, they're being built where they're needed and where they're economically viable. Warwick, for example, Stratford, for example, they're building 1,500 a year because the economics there work. In Nuneaton and Bedworth, the economics worked to build 640, and our plan has to build over 1,000 a year. We need this urgent review really, really quickly. If we don't have it, not only do we lose infrastructure, we lose the viability of some of the sites we have, because obviously the greenfield sites are far cheaper to build on than some of the regeneration proposals. And also some of the sites that include the schools and the doctors' surgeries, they actually cost more to develop. So what developers keep doing is applying for permission for the sites that have no infrastructure on. We've seen this in Wellington and St Nicholas. The site with the school on the top farm is nowhere near viable. The GP surgery hasn't happened.
Thank you very much, Councillor. In future, it would be really great if you could talk to the purpose of the report.
The review is in there, and it is what we were promised, a review of the borough plan.
You haven't mentioned gypsies and travellers at all, whether or not a report should come back in the future, but you've had your 3 minutes.
This is
We
on
are
the whole
working
subject.
to review this plan. This is the first meeting. But you need to know and be factually aware of how difficult and how long it takes. You'll get the same information if you turn up at every meeting of this local committee as everybody else sitting around this table.
And when are
Thank
we
you.
going to review the numbers?
Do we get points of clarification?
Yes, sorry. Yes. Yes.
Councillor Condicle, you referred to an onion ring scenario with people dying in the middle.
No, not people dying, the economy dying, because it's nice to build on countryside for developers. They build on countryside, and then the areas inside get very little development. So actually you end up with rings of new housing and then housing with very little development and very little infrastructure. So you need to build a dense town, not a town that keeps building new rings and then the inside dies. If you think of a tree, the living bit of the tree is around the outside, and if you just don't have a proper planning system, that's what you do. You keep building on the outside, building on the outside, building on the outside.
Point of clarification check. Sorry, can you explain how that would work with things like transforming Nuneaton, where you have potentially housing developments taking place within town centres? How would your...
But that's part of the onion ring system. If you have rings with money in, you have development, but then the housing is 2 or 3 miles away from where your town centre is. And the viability of the town centre is undercut. If the housing target's too high, they build on the countryside and they don't build in the Transforming Nuneaton project.
Okay. Thank you very much. Claire, did you have...
It was something similar to
Okay.
Councillor Evans, but let's not labour the point.
Yeah. Nice word. Right. Moving on. Open for... Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'll speak to the detail of the report, but I think as this is our first meeting, I've got to make a couple of observations, and that is that, first of all, we collectively as a council didn't really as such agree to an immediate review, because it's not immediate, as has been pointed out. It was June and now we're in January, and I think it was more a question of we were screaming from day one for an immediate review, and grudgingly that's kind of happened. And what seems to have, and please correct me if I'm wrong, tonight we've turned up and we're in this very tight funnel of here's the agenda, this is what we're working towards, this is the detail that we all want you to focus on. And actually, that's not our agenda. Our agenda is a bit more wide-ranging. Our concerns are things like, if we development to 1,000 a year, which I don't think is going to happen. That's 11,000, and yet the target's still 15. We do fundamentally at some point, and perhaps you can explain, Chair, where in this whole process, at which meeting are we going to start addressing the numbers side of things? Because fundamentally, we've always had issues with the overall number, and the proof of the pudding is that that number's probably not sustainable unless there's a radical change to the plan. And we'd need to have very good reasons for why we'd want to radically change the plan. Otherwise, the public won't buy into it. And at the end of the day, we're a democracy and we're here to do what the public want. So to get down to the specifics of this particular report and what we're being asked for here, again, I think, you know, it's taking stuff for granted. You know, we've all turned up and it's right, well, this is what we need to do because this thing's already agreed and this is already, and it's, whoa, no, we didn't agree DS4. As far as, you know, when I've stood up and spoken and my colleagues have about the Gypsy and Traveller recommendations that were put forward, I was, I think, about the only person who actually read every single page of what had been written by the external consultants, because actually the conclusions that the council put in terms of we need a lot more sites was completely opposed to what the report. You start reading the report and they say, just like everyone else, it's ageing population, birth rates are falling in our traveller community, a lot of them are moving down to be settled. Those that don't want to be completely settled just want to be settled for most of the year and have a pitch that they can have a large caravan on to go touring 4 weeks a year. So the actual requirement is going like that. And then we then raise the issue of, well, in that case, if our own traveller and Warwickshire wide, whatever, traveller community is shrinking, and when we got the audits actually on the ground of what the occupancy rates were for the existing sites, and they weren't full, consistently weren't full by some measure, it was like, why on earth are we considering having more? We've got a report telling us that, you know, the population of this is declining. Or are you saying that you want to build sites to attract in travellers from Ireland or wherever, or Scotland or the continent or some other part of the UK? I mean, or even the wider world. I mean, there's a million Roma gypsies in Brazil. I mean, what are we trying to do here, and what's our democratic mandate for doing that? And where's the money coming from when we've got, you know, a limited budget to spend it on? So, as far as I can see, unless there's some new evidence that comes out that says we have in our current traveller population, gypsy population, a massive undersupply, and that we need to produce some additional stuff, the only evidence I saw said, no, actually, you know, declining birth rates, settling down, moving into houses, the requirements reducing, and the occupancy and vacancy rates confirm that. So I think we've got a false premise here under 4.5. It's not about a report to tell us where we cite these. How many is it? 39 residential pitches and 40 odd families worth of stuff. Apparently we got too much already, and 40 odd more isn't needed. I think that's a report that we probably need, not one about where you put the 40. It's actually, do we need 40 odd, or have we got enough already?
Fair comment.
The policy in the local plan is DS4, and that's the policy that's adopted, which say we require 39 residential pitches and 5 transit pitches. We either need to change the local plan or ensure that the development plan document meets what the local plan says.
And I think the former is what I'm suggesting, just to be clear.
Right.
Just like the overall housing numbers needs to change.
In which case, the paragraph 3.9 sets out how we would be able to review a plan. What would be considered to be a complete review and what would be considered to be a partial review. And anything to do with any housing numbers or gypsy pitches is a complete review of the local plan, which means you then have to roll that plan forward to a period of at least 15 years.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we have 11 years left of this local plan.
A bit more certainty.
That would, if we reviewed the local plan in whole, that would then have to roll forward to 2036, which would be at least.
We've indulgence check. It says minimum 15 years, but we could set it for 20 years, couldn't we? And
yes, if you're willing to accept the evidence of what 20 years worth
to
of
give
housing need would be.
businesses and communities
gypsies.
real certainty about the future. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, most plans are for at least 20 years. Some are 15 years by the time they're adopted, but they start off on a longer.
Thank you.
Claire?
This is the first time I've clapped eyes on this, so I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I didn't get it. I haven't had a copy of it.
Oh, sorry about that.
So,
You all seem to have.
yeah, well, I didn't get a copy of it. So, just to pick up on what you were saying there, so the delivery of the pitches,
Yep.
we could necessarily leave it 15 years before we put a spade in the ground for one of these pitches.
No, because the need is there at the moment. The legislation actually says you should have a 5-year supply of gypsy pitches, the same as you should have a 5-year supply of housing land.
Right.
We haven't been tested on that because we haven't had any planning applications or appeals where an inspector has looked at that. So there are two things to consider. We have allowed a couple of extra, the planning committee has allowed a couple of extra sites since we did the plan, so we wouldn't necessarily be looking for 39.
So,
I think the other thing to say, Philip might be able to add something to this, is you're all aware that we took out a temporary injunction for the whole of the borough to stop unauthorised encampments. If we want that to become a permanent injunction, the courts will have wanted us to have at least made some progress on what we said we were going to do in the local plan, which is a development plan document to find sites for our need.
so if we've actually fulfilled part of that by saying we've got a need for sites and the sites aren't coming forward,
Yeah.
does that satisfy some of the criteria of that court injunction?
No, because it's still our responsibility to find sites for the need, like it would be, not that this is ever likely to happen, if we needed to find residential land for housing and the sites hadn't come forward, then it's up to us as the local planning authority to consider that and make progress on trying to encourage people to put forward those sites. So it's the same for the gypsy and traveller need. If people out there aren't sending us sites that they would consider to be used for gypsies, it's up to us as the local authority to look for sites and to consider where we should put them.
But sorry, Chair, I just want to be clear because I don't want to misinterpret what you said. Did you say though that the only couple of applications that have come forward have been approved?
Yes.
Ah, right. So it's not like we've declined anyone or anything.
No. If we did, we'd probably be in this argument a lot earlier.
Right.
Because a planning inspector would say, why have you refused this when it's clear your local plan says you need 39?
This is why taking,
And that's a material consideration.
which is why council are probably taking your observations and the general thing that we don't need that many sites. You know, this is why another detailed report ought to come forward to find out exactly where we are at this present moment in time. And if I'm right, Catherine, this in turn will form part of the total review of the local plan, including the numbers. Ali?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we can make the speculations or assume that gypsy numbers are going to decline, that they're going to move into houses. Some of them winter in houses, they've got properties elsewhere, they'll overwinter in those and then hit the road again in the spring, and they move around all over the place. And it's one of those things that's been enshrined for a long time, that within the local authorities have got to make these provisions. I did ask for anybody to come forward at one point, but to put their ward up for consideration, nobody did. I'm not surprised at that, but I wasn't expecting a flood of applicants. The issues on here, if that's what we've got to do, that's what we've got to do. If that's what's required and that's what's called for, have we got any wriggle room on the numbers, which I don't think we have? And first and secondly, what is the difference between a residential pitch and a transit pitch? To me, there is no difference, and I can't worry about that because residential pitches mean something else to me. And this Councillor Troman's actually saying that we've already got these up in Coventry Road. Is that what you're talking about, on Coventry Road?
Yeah, and there's private ones as well, and we've just apparently approved a couple more. So
County Council side, you mean?
Yeah.
And the one at Hartsdale, of course, that's County Council as well, so you need cooperation from them if you want to include those in the numbers. But they class that as an emergency site and won't entertain anything else on it.
Yeah. Any comment, Kathleen?
Yeah, the only change would be, a bit like housing, anything that we've already approved and that's been implemented. So there are a couple that would bring the number down from 39, but it's not a great number. The need was done on the basis of knowing all of those sites were already there. So the site that the County Council run at the Griff and all the private sites, the majority of which are down Coventry Road, Orkington, but not all of them. So that the need of the 39 pitches was knowing all the sites that we already had.
So in addition to?
So this is in addition to that.
Right. What's the difference between residential pitch and
A residential pitch is where they choose to live for the majority of the time. A transit pitch it's to accommodate people who may be coming to visit relatives for a short time, or maybe coming to visit the area for a short time, but don't want to own a particular pitch or rent a pitch for a short time. So it's a short time. They're generally up to 3 months. And then an emergency stopping place is something different, and that's more to do with moving them off unauthorised encampments and moving them to a place where we would tolerate.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, Carl.
Yeah, I've got a few things. First of all, I'm just looking at the dates and the time scales of some of the delivery plans. So on page 21 with regards to the gypsy and site allocations, the publication of the report, which is scheduled, it's going to be submitted to the Secretary of State on this timescale in June 2020, but it says the initial consultation was in October 2015. That's 4 years ago. Surely the representations made in that consultation 4 years ago, the matters are going to be completely different to now, I suspect. Am I right in saying that?
No, that was on the basis of the need that was in the local plan at that time, which was the same as what we're discussing tonight. What happened at that time was that for that round of consultation on the local plan, we included some gypsy sites within that plan.
Oh, I see, right.
So that consultation was done at that time. We received an awful lot of objection to the sites. I think I'm right in saying that all the sites that were suggested in that have now all got planning permission for residential use anyway.
Yeah.
So none of the sites would still be available. None of them had been put forward by anybody as gypsy sites. They were sites we chose to put in for public consultation. So if you like, in that way, yes, it's different because you'd have to go out again because none of those sites would still be available. We've still got to find sites for around about 39 pitches.
I've got a question about the review.
Yeah.
My understanding is the reason why we can't start the immediate review is because the local plan in North Warwickshire hasn't been adopted by the Secretary of State. That's what I've been told.
Right.
If that's the case, why can't the planning department start the preparations of it? On the grounds that it's likely to be adopted by the Secretary of State.
Yeah. The difficulty that North Warwickshire are having at the moment is that they're awaiting for some confirmation from the government that they are likely to get a grant towards some highway works that will be required to enable them to bring forward their allocations in their local plan. If they don't get that money, they will have to go back and find some different allocations because it will only happen with the grant monies. That's not necessarily holding up anything anybody else is doing. All that means is that they're in a different part of the process. What I'm suggesting is that the evidence base, if you've ever, I know Councillor Condercourt, if you've ever looked at the Borough Plan page on the website and looked at, I think there's 11 different titles of things. If you click on each one of those, you'll see all the different bits of evidence base that were required for the local plan.
Yeah.
So all that evidence base has got to be renewed or refreshed. We've also got to look to see whether we need any more than what's there, or whether we don't need any of that anymore. But the majority of that will be needed to be renewed and refreshed.
Yeah.
A lot of it was done with the other authorities, jointly, because just because there's a line on the road that says that's North Warwickshire and this is Nuneaton and Bedworth, a lot of the evidence is required jointly. 2, it's a lot cheaper, because we all pay a fifth or a sixth or a seventh, because there were some pieces of evidence that Coventry City Council and the County Council paid for at the same time. So that's one stage of it. Some is really technical, like strategic flood risk assessments and water cycle studies, which can't be done by policy officers, has to go out. And again, that's something that we generally share with the authorities that are in the same flood area, same river basin. So again, that doesn't necessarily be the same geography as Warwickshire.
Am I right in saying that there has been 2 workshops already? Planners, officers from across the county were already starting to meet. The 3rd workshop is in March this year, and the idea is to start commissioning work as quickly as possible, right, that will cover the whole area, because they will be looking also at employment strategic land opportunities as well. There's the infrastructure problem across Coventry and Warwickshire and Solway Hall, and so all that work, we have the Planning Advisory Service working with us, right, and obviously other vested Coventry and Warwickshire LEP and things like that. So it isn't just a case of housing numbers, although we want to get to those housing numbers as quickly as possible. So that we'll be looking to commission as a group, you know, whether North Warwickshire are slightly behind us or not, work that needs to be done going forward. The good thing is, you know, that the other, from my point of view, the other councils have got to review quickly. You know, and luckily now we've got ours, we can tag on to that and play catch up, because we have got a lot of evidence that needs reviewing, but there's a lot of evidence, it shouldn't take so long, I would think.
No,
Okay?
you're right.
Sorry, I had one more question. Just the supplementary planning documents.
Yeah.
A bit confused because it says on page 24 a formal adoption by the council in the case of the SPDs, but when you look at the table on page 25 it says the level of approval will be cabinet. Is it cabinet or full council that will be approving the SPDs, which I presume are the concept plans?
Yeah, as amongst other things,
Yeah.
you raised the query when we had the single member decision, and it has now been confirmed that it needs to be full council.
Good, that's right, because I was going to make a recommendation that it be full council, but won't bother with doing that now.
So we'll go to cabinet first,
Yeah.
and then full council.
Good.
2 bites of the cherry, plus this committee.
Chair, if we can come back in on the other points, because I obviously spoke to the initial recommendation here, but as Carl's just referred to on the supplementary planning documents, one I think we need to look at urgently is because, you know, one I don't think we're deep into, the affordable housing supplementary document. There's the 2007 document and then the later 2019. So, I mean, I think there's you know, before things get away from us, and we've given out thousands of houses in planning permission, and it's almost too late to sort it out, it's probably worth having a look at now, I would suggest. And maybe we can make an amendment to say that this is another little more modest report that we have brought forward to the next or a subsequent meeting. But, you know, looking at the number of houses that I'm thinking about St Nicholas and Weddington that have been built or are just about to be completed so far, it's about 1,000, and 25% of which should be social housing. I'm thinking that it's about right with them. We might actually be slightly ahead of that because some of the stuff got built first. But when you look at the plans, it's supposed to be split between social rent and shared equity included in that, and starter homes or affordable homes or whatever. And as far as I can figure out, I think, you know, if it's 250, then there's 200 that are social rent, 50 that are maybe shared equity, maybe, and precisely 0 that are starter homes for a purchase. So we're not keeping to our policy. We're not doing what the government's suggesting, because they seem to get a bit hot under the collar about 3 years ago, and remind local authorities that affordable to buy is still affordable housing. It's not just. So before we end up going too much further with planning permissions and going too far down that road, I think we probably need to look at the affordable housing, because we maybe want to tweak the policy, but we're not keeping to the policy we've got already by the look of it.
Well, there's two things. The policy suggested starter homes because that's what the government guidance suggested was going to be brought in, which never was. So there was never any detail of what was considered to be a starter home. So the negotiations on all the planning applications are for 25% affordables, and the range and the percentage of how that is made up, whether it's socially rented or shared equity, is done on each application in conjunction with the housing strategy manager, and that's reported to the committee at the time the application is. There are no applications on any of the allocations that don't meet the 25%.
But other local authorities do have starter homes being built, don't they? And there's even some that...
I think it depends what you consider or what anybody considers to be a starter home.
It's 20% below market, isn't it?
The government guidance
Any other restriction?
was
Like
never brought in
Can we ask the
to
officer
have...
to finish before she's interrupted, please?
There was never any guidance as what they considered to be a starter home was. So we've never negotiated for starter homes as part of the affordable, the 25%. But we've got 25% of affordables either socially rented or shared equity or whatever the housing strategy manager says at the time of the application. So we're not missing out, and the majority of them are carried out by registered social landlords that we've worked with for some years, and the majority of them are, we have the allocations policy is that we allocate the people to go into those properties from our housing list.
Yeah, starter homes is a misnomer, isn't it? I mean, you could class that as barracks, rabbit hutches, you know, dog kennels. They will make sure, developers will make sure that they still get their 12 to 20% profit, whatever size of property or type of property it is. And that's life, and that's business, and that's the way that they operate. Affordable, we've been screaming, or I've been screaming for years about what is affordable. Yeah. A house is only, or property is only affordable if you've got the money to buy it, and that's where the disparity comes in, because a lot of people haven't got the equity or the wherewithal or the job to get a mortgage to buy the house. So it's not affordable to them, and never will be, neither will a starter home, because it's not affordable. And that's where it all falls over, because there's never been a definition of affordable that I can find, or I've been told, and I've asked a number of times about that. And we're never going to get to a situation, I don't think, where we can actually say, well, that's reasonable, because the market varies all over the place, and people are in a trap. And that's why renting is going up, because people haven't got the money to purchase properties.
So, Chair, I need to come back in there. All the consultations that I went to, and I went to them across the borough, people said, we need starter homes so people can get on the property ladder. Yeah. You know, councillors are on the property ladder, people need to get on the property ladder. Starter homes, you know, there is a definition, it is 20% below. You can argue it's not been put in law or whatever, but there is a general understanding and others do it. So I think what we've got here is what the public want, and then a political policy decision which is affordable can only be rented. well, you know, or largely rented. You know, people want to be able to get their kids on the housing ladder. Nuneaton has more affordable house prices than many, and we do see people really, really struggling to afford the houses that are being built on the estates all round by me, because they start at 3-bed semis or 3-bed detached. I mean, there's new 3-bed detached where they want 370,000 quid for them being proposed up the top of Higham Lane. The builders can make a turn out of doing 2-bed semis for half that. And that's the kind of thing a lot of people can afford. And in relative terms, with the cost of how low interest rates are, it's a lot more affordable than when I bought a similarly priced terrace house in Heath End Road. So affordability in Nuneaton is not unrealistic if we can get those kind of houses built.
Yes, I think that is the thing. Can we get those type of houses built, whether or not?
We can if we insist on it with the builder.
Let me finish, which is what I was going to ask. Is it feasible, policy-wise, to have that type of thing added into affordable housing? You must let me finish, Councillor.
My understanding that the legislation isn't there to back you up, and you require the legislation to back you up if you want to refuse it, if the developer won't go along with negotiation.
So,
however, my understanding is also that we are about to soon get a planning green paper, white paper, one or either of them, which will look at the affordability of housing again. So there is likely to be further legislation about it. The benefit of having a supplementary planning document is you can change it fairly easily by going through the same process that we've done with that affordable housing policy document now. So we've carried out some consultation on that. That's one of the first drafts to go to Cabinet and full council. That doesn't mean that's the end of the story. If there's different legislation that allows us to do more things for affordability, we can change that supplementary planning document fairly easily.
and I would be thinking that if that was the case and we could do that, I'm only speaking here as a chair, right, and personal thing, but I think if we could do that and national legislation allows us to do that, and we knew that we were able to change it to be more favourable towards residents in this borough to get onto the market, and into the market, or into their new starter home, in brackets, then I think we would be doing it.
But on that point, Chair, it's not that we can't do it now, it's that we can't, you're saying we can't legally impose it on developers,
Yes.
but why would you want to? They're going to make more, as Councillor Longdon said, out of an owner-occupied than they're going to make out of building social rent. Yeah, they make money out of that, kind of, but not as much as they'll make out of even a discounted owner-occupier. So it's not that we can't. We could ask the developers now. Are you saying that developers have just point-blank refused?
No, we've not asked them because the guidance wasn't there when the government first suggested having starter homes as part of the affordable offer. A lot of developers geared themselves up to do that, but the guidance never came out as to how you were to do it, what it meant, and how that fitted in with your whatever percentage you were asking for. My understanding originally was it was going to be extra to whatever percentage you had in the local plan. So you might have 25% affordable, as I've already discussed, plus some starter homes, but that was never put into.
Okay, then I'll make a suggestion.
Chair, developers, people don't understand what developers are. Like, developers have standard, bog standard proposals for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses, properties that they then market in different places. That's all predetermined. They know how many bricks go in it, they know how many tiles go on the roof, everything. And that's what your package is. And they then determine the best type, as far as they're concerned, for them to make money in a particular location. And that's what they'll build. And irrespective of what we say, there's no way we can make them do anything else. We're supposed to have a certain amount of control over design, and we haven't. We might be able to change the fascias on some of them. I don't know. It's we have a hell of a lot of difficulty and a lot of kickback from it. And even Teresa made that mistake, didn't she? she said they've got to get their finger out and start building all these ones where they've got planning applications already done. And they turned around and said, it's nothing to do with you, we're only responsible to ourselves and our shareholders. And she backed off. She did nothing but rattle the sabre and backed off. So if the Prime Minister at the time has got no control over them, I'm damn sure we're going to have even less control over these developers. They'll do exactly what they want because that's what their market's telling them.
Yeah.
And that's the end story. So we can argue as much as we like what we'd like to see. I'd like to see lots of things, but not going to get it because the planning legislation doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in our favour. It doesn't work in the favour of people. It works in the favour of developers, and that's it.
Would the committee be minded to have a briefing note update on exactly what we can do, can't do, whether or not we are able to start asking developers? We can look at it and then come back.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
What we do as well, and what we actually provide,
do.
and what we actually have been able to secure.
What we're allowed to do.
Yes.
I think, Chair, to make sense of it, we have to also look at, what happens not just in Nuneaton and Bedworth, but what happens, at least in England and Wales, what have other local
Well,
authorities do.
even in the rest of the county, there are varying percentages wise.
Yeah.
In Warwick goes 40, don't they? And
Yeah, it has to be done on evidence base, funnily enough. And and another thing that has to be done as part of all the local plans is something that I mentioned last week, is you have to do a viability assessment of it. And that has to meet, that what I said last week was that has to be to meet all the policies in your local plan. So if you ask for 40% affordable housing, then something else in your local plan has to go if the whole thing isn't viable.
Yeah.
And I think that was a conversation that was held in one of the previous versions of the... It is different in Warwick and Stratford. The land prices and the house sales are better, so you get more, so they are able to ask for 40%. The other thing is, I think, is that we are a very small borough. So our housing market area is the borough. So generally speaking, the house prices in Nuneaton are the same as the house prices in Bedworth. That isn't the same in a bigger authority like Warwick. The house prices in one area might be completely different from the house prices in another. So that's why they can sometimes ask for 40% in some areas, but 20 or 25% in another. And that also may be reflecting the need. Again, one housing market area, our need is for the whole of the borough. If somebody's in need of a house and they live in the borough, it's not that difficult for them to live in Nuneaton when they previously lived in Bedworth. It can be difficult to get to work and various other things like that. But generally speaking, we're one housing market area.
okay, so going back to the purpose of the report and the recommendation, we will add that as another recommendation for a detailed report on starter homes, national policy, etc. Come back as a briefing there.
And Chair, when you were talking about the Gypsy and Traveller paper that's going to come forward,
Yeah.
I think I heard you agree with the point that we can't just take what's there. We have to look at, because that's based on very old evidence, we have to look and say what is actually the current need.
No, we can't do that because that's not what the policy says. The policy is based on that. What we can do is update that need by what we've approved since.
Okay,
Like
I
for
fundamentally
housing
have to object to that. We can't be tied in. I read a report that started off saying very clearly that the demand was going down and that under occupancy rates were being regularly and consistently measured in the existing sites. We've got the acid test, which is if there was need, we'd have had more applications come forward. We've granted everything that's come forward and we've only had 2. So clearly there isn't all this pent-up need, otherwise we'd have a lot more applications. I think we have to fundamentally question that whole 39 plus 5 because it's based on very old evidence and evidence that we, as the opposition group, completely disputed at the time. I stood up and I read bits out of it in the council as much as I was able to. So I this whole set of This whole group cannot be about, you have to take everything we've agreed as read.
No,
Otherwise, what on earth are we doing here?
Isn't
If the 15,000 target is absolutely fixed and we can't revisit that, if the gypsy and traveller number thing is absolutely fixed and we can't revisit that, if all of these policies that you made are fixed and we're just here for window dressing, you know, but what's the point? So it has to be re-examined, unless you can give me a legal reason why it can't be.
I can give you a legal reason.
Yeah.
Chair.
The development plan document has to meet what the policy in the local plan says. The policy in the local plan, the adopted local plan says that. To do anything different, you would have to have a complete new evidence base and a new local plan.
I thought we were in...
Or don't do the development plan document.
You said it was a minor review or a significant review of the plan. I thought that was the point. We are doing a significant review of the plan.
Yeah, but that then puts off the whole thing for, until you've got all the new evidence base, which then gives you new housing numbers. I'll remind you again, that also means that you have to roll the plan forward for at least another 5 years, which may then give you some more need. So the numbers may not change greatly to what's in this plan. If you then want to consider gypsy and travellers, that is some 2 years away by the time you've done all this evidence base.
But we've already approved the sites and all the rest of it.
We haven't
We can't have fait
haven't got-
accomplis here.
Councillor, we haven't got any sites.
Well,
We,
yeah, but that's the whole point. What you're saying is we've got to come up with that urgently, and then 2 years after that, you can revisit it. Well, we can't take planning permissions away.
No, what
We can't not uncompulsorily purchase land or whatever.
the need in the adopted local plan is for 39 pitches. We
Right.
can update that and say, right, we've approved 3, so now we need only to look for 36. But to go back and change that 39 does require new evidence base.
Ah, well
You
then
can-
that's what
You
I'm
can,
asking
you can
for.
do that, do the new evidence base as part of review of a local plan. However, got to be mindful of the fact that we still want to make that injunction permanent. We promised the
Well,
local
let's not
plan
conflate the two
inspector.
issues. Let's get the new
thank
evidence
you very
base.
much, yeah. We'll
Thank you.
go from there. Claire.
Can I just ask, when we receive retrospective planning
Yes.
permission for sites where people have moved on to somebody's garden and, you know, it's some distant relative and we have to accommodate that?
Yep.
Do they get counted in?
Yes.
So they can go as permanent pitches?
You can count in anything that's got permanent permission.
Right. Okay.
So,
And we're looking roughly, so we've got 39 minus 3, so we're looking at 36 permanent pitches. And how big are the pitches? How much space are we talking about?
they tend to be measured against the Caravan Sites Act, which I think, right, is saying there has to be 6 metres between caravans or pitches. So, is it 21 pitches at there?
Something like that.
So a pitch, it's not a great deal of land. The majority of the ones down Coventry Road, Bulkington, if you know them, are generally for 1 or 2 families, and so they have 1, 2, 3, 4 pitches on them. Almost all of our privately approved sites are in the green belt,
Yeah.
which is also part of the difficulty, because generally gypsy sites aren't an acceptable use in the green
They're
belt.
all about 12 metres.
Yeah.
Six
There has to be 6
metres for the
metres
caravan and
between
6
the
metres
caravans.
gap, so there's
Yeah.
5.
Right. So how many pitches per site would we look at putting on? Would we minimum and maximum so as not to create trouble in an area, or would we spread them about? Have we got
Generally,
any-
yes.
Okay.
Generally, the advice and guidance is that you shouldn't look for large sites.
Okay.
The large unauthorised site at Bulkington was 21 pitches. If you knew that at the time
Yes.
it was occupied and how much land it took, 21.
Okay. And Are there any specific areas where we would not look to put these pictures?
There aren't any specific areas. We would have to have good reason for them to be in the green belt because it is normally an unacceptable use in the green belt. However, if you've got material considerations, there isn't any other land. All other land has been put forward for generally speaking, what happens is the other land's been put forward for housing, and so nobody wants to suggest it for a gypsy site. All of our, even the site at Griff is in the green belt.
So if there were some sites to come forward, it would be incredibly difficult for us in planning terms to refuse them because of the need.
At the moment, the need is one of the material considerations we have to look at, yes.
Thank you very much.
Right, okay. They're the two recommendations for the reports to come back. Is there anything else? Because I only envisaged this first meeting because there was only one item really, lasting an hour. Okay, how soon do we wish to meet again? When, officers, would you have these reports ready? Is it a month? What, should we have that other workshop first?
When do you have the workshop again?
I think it's in March.
I'd be happy to wait until after that point.
Yeah. So one thing I'm putting March. But I can get a date out to you.
Is it the 27th?
7th or something.
20th?
Whenever is fine, Chair, I think,
Yeah.
but unless other members object, I think after the next workshop probably makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yes, well, I'll be able to give a report back from the workshop to the committee.
And would the other two reports be done by then?
The Gypsy and Traveller one and the affordable housing?
Yeah.
We can do a Gypsy and Traveller one if you want, but what do you want that to say?
Well, you know, I think we agreed it needs to test the assumption that of the need, and otherwise it's not worth doing. I mean, and a lot's changed. You know, we're not, you know, Brexit. We're no more under an obligation to accommodate travellers from Ireland than we are from Guatemala come post Brexit.
So more of a background document on Gypsy and Travellers, what we would need to do, rather than looking to allocate sites to meet the need.
Yeah, I think we need to question we want the evidence-based checking because it's years out, and the evidence on the ground is.
That will do for now.
Yeah,
It's contradictory.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Right. There ended the first meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
I'll tell you more.
Thank you, Nicola.